Hello, everyone. Welcome to ReachIvy's webinar series, Know Your Top Colleges. This speaker series helps students get an insight into top colleges from around the world and decipher the application process. But before we get started, a little bit about ReachIvy. ReachIvy is a premium education and careers advisory. Over the last 6 years, ReachIvy has established a strong presence amongst distinguished leaders in the education space. ReachIvy has successful admits across schools globally, from INSEAD and LSE to Harvard, Columbia, and Stanford, and have been featured in Business World, Economic Times, Education World, and more. Some of the services from ReachIvy include counseling, college selection, essay editing, and applications. Interview prep, resume review, LinkedIn review, etc. are some among the others. A little bit about myself to follow up. I am Shyam Gursahani, a senior counselor at ReachIvy, and also the co-founder of Albatross Digital, a marketing services company serving brands in India and across the world. I have completed my MBA from the University of Cambridge, Judge Business School. We have a very special guest with us today, and I'm very excited to introduce Jared Liu, the Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Yale. Hello, Jared, and welcome to our webinar.
Great. Hello. Thanks for having me, everyone. It's a privilege to be with you.
Great. A little bit about Jared for all you guys out there. Jared Liu is the Senior Associate Director of Admissions Management. He joined Yale after a number of years in secondary school admissions. Prior to that, he lived in Washington, D.C., working for the environmental lobby and a U.S. Senator. Wow. In addition to more than 5 years on the Hill and in political circles, he brings knowledge of banking, risk management, and compliance. As a student, his passion for the outdoors and conversation carried him to Maine, where he completed his undergraduate degree at the Bowdoin College. Wow, that's awesome, Jared. We're really looking forward to our talk today and to learn more about the MBA program at Yale and deciphering the application process and understanding the admissions criteria. So thank you again for joining us. I'm just going to jump in and ask you my first question. So let's talk a little bit about the university. Could you share with us a bit of background about Yale and the School of Management? You could include talking points from location, history, philosophy, and the school's mission.
Sure. Well, thank you for that generous introduction, and it's a privilege to be with you. We, as you might know, are traveling around the world in order to provide more access to prospective students. And this is one way in which we passively travel the world as well. So we appreciate your help in reaching as many students as possible. So props to ReachIvy for hosting this session. For anyone who's never been to New Haven, Connecticut, that's where Yale University is located. New Haven, Connecticut is geographically located on the eastern coast of the United States. We're about halfway between New York and Boston. And there are lots of things I could say about how how New Haven is a great city in its own right, great foodie capital, really fantastic, very approachable, walkable community. But I would say a lot of students also find that it's a really perfect balance between being accessible in terms of getting out to interviews or recruiting trips or other networking events that they need to do because there are so many international airports located so close to us, as well as being a really approachable city, really a place where you can actually live in as part of a community. So New Haven's geographically located, like I said, on the East Coast. It's a great place to be. We're also very fortunate to be part of Yale University. It's an internationally well-known brand, but the Yale School of Management is actually a very young school. We're entering our 5th decade. It's actually, as Dean Anjani Jain likes to joke, it's younger than the business school he attended in India. So we are we are the youngest graduate school at Yale University, and we're also the largest, which in the context of most MBA programs is still quite small. We're a graduating class of about 350 students. So in the MBA landscape, that's still pretty small, but Yale University has made a commitment to staying intentionally small through and through. The mission philosophy of the school is to educate leaders for business and society. It's a great place to start the conversation, and so I will sort of wrap up my answer on that. But we feel very confident with that mission. It's the founding mission of the school, and I think it means different things to different people. For a lot of folks who are looking at the Yale School of Management, what they translate that into is that we have a strength in nonprofit and social sector. And I think the answer to that is probably a yes and. We certainly do have a number of students who have come from nonprofit, who are looking to go into something social impact related. But our context is actually somewhat similar to other MBA programs in that the majority of our class are coming from finance and consulting and going to finance and consulting. But the majority for us is a very different context than many other schools in that for us it's more in the range of 50 to 60% combined finance and consulting. And so that diversity that's represented outside of that, folks going into nonprofit, into manufacturing, into government, into energy, into many other things is a much larger slice of the pie. But even for those who are going into finance and consulting, I would say that mission still really matters. And so it's not that folks tend to come here simply with the goal of attaining a greater brand name or attaining greater wealth to their salary history, but really looking to make an impact, whether they're going into finance and it's something like microeconomic development loans that they want to work in, whether it's that they're going into consulting, but not just some sort of, like I said, brand name consulting, but something that is more healthcare consulting in a developing country, or again, there's something very mission-driven for the individual in what they're trying to pursue, and that's where the mission of the school really starts to align well for candidates.
Wow, that's really insightful. Thank you so much for that. I'll move on to my next question. This is a little bit about the program itself. Could you tell us more about the MBA program at Yale? You could talk about the degree, the strengths of the program, the co-curriculum details, the teaching style, any distinct features about the program that our applicants should know.
Absolutely, yes. So thanks for the question. I definitely relish any opportunity to sort of brag on our university, if you will. Starting even with that mission, we've outlined for the school, really, and this was Dean Snyder's initiative when he came on board, was to outline 3 objectives that are both fitting with the school as well as direct what our strategic objectives are. And for us, those are being the most integrated with our home university, 2, being the most global U.S. Institution, and 3, being the best source of elevated leaders across sectors and across regions. And I think we'll probably get into it in this conversation a little bit deeper, so I won't go into it too far. But the way we deliver on those is really distinct from other top-tier MBA programs. A few things I would say about the program in particular. One is, I think for folks who have not been to Yale School of Management, it's hard to understand how these things actually happen. And one of maybe the least talked about things in MBA education that is actually one of the magics, if you will, for how this works, is that we have a really high percentage of classes that are team taught. It's unusual at this level. A lot of times folks who are looking for undergraduate university are focused on what that student-faculty ratio is. I did mention earlier that Yale has made a commitment through and through its universities to be intentionally small, across the graduate programs. And in part, that's, part of the answer. But a larger part of the answer is the way the faculty come together. So I'll give you maybe one concrete example, which is a class called Modeling Managerial Decisions. It's part of our core curriculum, and I'm sure we'll talk about the core a little bit more. But this class in particular is taught by actually Anjani Jain, who is really his academic background is in quantitative modeling, and it's co-taught by Nathan Novemsky, who is a psychologist and a marketing professor by practice. So very unusual for these 2 types of faculty to come together to co-teach a class. And I think it's also unusual to have a community where the faculty can get up in front of the class and very transparently tell the students, listen, this is somewhat of an experiment. We think this makes sense. We think that, teaching you the same MBA curriculum that's been taught for the last 50 or 60 years that teaches very hard-based disciplines like accounting, marketing, finance, doesn't make as much sense. And, sort of the training that you need brings together these different perspectives, allows the faculty to disagree with one another in the class. So, in this situation, you have Dean Jane, who will, talk about how, sort of the strength of the human mind is one that really can, come to these amazing ways of normatively looking at the world and helping you as a leader predictively make the best managerial decisions. And then you have Professor Novemsky, who comes in and says, the human mind is ultimately flawed and will always arrive at a less than desirable outcome. And so you can immediately hear the conflict between the two of them. And I think it's a courageous university faculty who can put themselves in that situation. So you can hear this, that it's a different dynamic, a different setup. And like I said, one of the keys that really unlocks that is that the faculty have many courses that are co-taught. And I'm happy to get into that more as well.
It's actually quite nice to hear. So you mentioned a little bit about, the professors. So what's the teaching style like across?
Yeah, so it actually varies quite a bit. The program has no normative requirement for whether it's going to be lecture-based, case-based. In fact, for anyone who is able to visit our campus, which I definitely encourage you to do if you do have the luxury of the time and the resources to come visit the campus, I think there's no substitute for that. At the same time, we also recognize that that's not always possible, and we're constantly thinking about ways to help bring the campus to you. And the students really take quite a lead in that, constantly thinking about how they can do things like Instagram takeovers and such to take you around the building. So be on the lookout for perhaps more social media to do some of those things to help bring the campus to you. But if you were to come to campus, what you'd see is especially for an older academic institution, a lot of times you inherit a space. So what was a psychology building is now retrofitted to be an MBA curriculum. We are extremely fortunate that the university made a commitment to the MBA program, and we, in 2014, moved into a space that was specifically designed for the MBA curriculum. And you can see how space really matters in the building. And as you move around, you see there are classrooms that are lecture-based, there are classrooms that are designed for casing. There are classrooms that are specifically for boardroom practicum. There are some for debate. There are some for small groups and teams. So the classrooms really vary. And even more than that, the building has factored in really the immense number of small groups and teams meetings that have to happen, whether it's teaming with 4 or 5 people in the building or teaming with 4 or 5 folks who are in a different time zone and speak a different language. The technology is built into the classrooms and into the meeting spaces universally across the building in order to facilitate the kind of teaming that really should happen and is for us a requirement in terms of the MBA curriculum. But you just see a real range in terms of how we deliver it. I should say too, as I'm cognizant, I might have gotten myself a little bit past in terms of talking about the program. We offer a 2-year full-time MBA. It's the program that I work with most closely. I have fantastic colleagues who work in the executive MBA program, the master's in systemic risk, and some of the other programs like the PhDs. So we have a range of programs depending on where folks are in their career trajectory. But for us and for what I'm speaking about today, we offer just a 2-year full-time MBA.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. You've described a lot about the program, but as a student, as an applicant, I'm very curious. At least the students that come to us are very curious about a classic day at Yale. There's a lot of curiosity, on how a normal day at Yale would be like. Could you describe it for us?
Sure. So in Eastern time, it's 8:22 right now, and I got into the building at 7:30 this morning, so I've been here for an hour. And for most, work environments, for most schools, you would be coming into a skeletal building. There would be very few people here. They'd still be in bed, maybe shaking the sleep out with a little bit of coffee. This building was already going when I arrived at 7:30. I'll tell you, some of the best conversations I've had with students have been at 9:30 at night, on the rare occasion when I'm walking out of the building then, and the student is as well, to go home. But this is very much a living, breathing place around the clock. So, sort of passive advice to applicants also is not to underestimate the intensity of this program. It's both what the program asks of you as well as what you'll ask of yourself. But you're constantly going to be in meetings with students. So, when I got here at 7:30, there were already students who were clearly in some of the huddle and breakout rooms, meeting in small groups and teams. Officially, the classes won't start until I think 10:10 is our first class of the day. If you come for a campus visit, we'll just simply make any class that's available, usually at the 10 o'clock time slot, open. So you're welcome to choose any class that's there. We try not to try not to cull through that too much. We want to give you choice in terms of what you do. But so for most students, they're going to be here before class, working in some groups and teams. We've got a fantastic cafe in the building. For many people, some of the most emotionally charged moments of their time here will, be that first thing in the morning, and how folks at the cafe may know exactly what their double chai latte order is, and get them kick-started right away. We have folks who come in from around the university, actually, because we've got such a fantastic hospitality service here that offers everything from the cafe through lunch. But usually starts there. Usually someone will have maybe 2 classes in a day. We've got various time slots. But the entire school breaks from 11:30 to 1. And there are going to be, when I say breaks, there are no classes, there are no official functions that are scheduled. But what does happen, and this is where a lot of students will sort of joke tongue-in-cheek about the fear of missing out, is, there may be 12, 14, 20 different sessions that are happening in that time block that are put on by the CDO, that are sponsored by student clubs. It may be the CEO of some company coming to talk about her professional journey. It may be the chief marketing officer from a tech company coming to talk about how they really love SOM talent and how they can pull more students through the pipeline. There'd be any number of things that are happening during that time slot where students will choose to attend one and be also thinking about the 20 that they couldn't attend. But it also allows us as a community really to break for lunch, and a time when folks know that there's a moderately unscheduled time where those sorts of meetings can happen. For me, that's really special. Many of the environments that I've worked in, you don't have that kind of protected space, and I love that. But on the flip side, classes continue through the afternoon, groups and teams continue to meet, and you'll see any number of folks, like I said, who are in this building at 9 o'clock at night. We do a few things that are special to our community on more of a weekly basis. So we always close the week with something called closing bell. For us, the end of the week is Thursday, not Friday. We have no classes on Friday because recruiting demands have many students who are away or need to be away on a work day. And so Friday, Saturday, Sunday are the building is closed. So Thursday is the end of our week. And on Thursday nights, they do something called closing bell, which is an all-community happy hour of sorts. And for us, I would say, it's important to recognize that when I say it's an all community, that means your spouse, your children, it means faculty, it means staff. Many folks from around this place descend on closing bell, and it really is a community moment. People also take the opportunity to share with one another. So it may be Southeast Asian Students Association, I think, is sponsoring the upcoming closing bell, and there may be some cultural sharing, there may be some cuisine sharing, but it's a way that folks learn about different communities of folks here, and they tend to be sponsored by clubs. The weekends are lively for anyone who follows American football and is passionate as we are about the Yale-Harvard American football rivalry. That's this weekend. So students will, in classic form, paint their faces and get down to the games, and probably all lose their voices by Saturday evening. But it's just a great community spirit. And it's also a great reminder for us about the connection with broader Yale University. I mean, it's more than just taking classes across the university or expanding your network, but there are many shared experiences. So I got on a little bit of a tangent about your question about, what the average day is. It might be that there is no average day, if you will. And maybe just to sort of wrap it up by trying to be a little bit more concrete with your question as well, I'll give you, one example of a class that is just wrapping up that people are really excited about. I know they've got some video out on the website that you can watch as well. But Zoe Chance teaches a class called Mastering Influence and Persuasion, and they do this fun exercise called the Paperclip Challenge. And the idea is you literally start with a paperclip in your hands, and what can you successfully trade that up for, through the art of persuasion and influence. And it's amazing. Every group comes back with anything ranging from they got from a paperclip to a workable microwave, through one group actually traded it all the way up to a car this year. So some pretty neat, again, shared experiences that happen at this place that are also learning opportunities.
Wow, I like to meet the guy who got the car. So you mentioned CEOs from different companies visiting the campus, visiting Yale, and talking about their jobs, and just talking about how excited they are to recruit from the Yale SOM. What are some of the facilities available to students who want to either switch careers or pursue entrepreneurial interests while in the program?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question to ask as well, because my experience working in admissions, which is a really fun job, I'll sort of make a professional plug for anyone who's interested in admissions, I love it, is that most students see themselves as non-traditional. They see themselves as not coming from finance or consulting, or not having an economics or business background. And then complicating that, they're looking to make a pivot. And so they want to go into something that, on paper, they, don't see that anyone will give them the interview. And I think this degree becomes very powerful for them because it unlocks the ability for them to pursue that. So I'll tell you that we see about 70%, 70, of our students actually make a pivot from the industry they're in pre-SOM to what they're doing for an industry post-SOM. It's amazing. It's one of the things that I love about this place, that students are inspired on a daily basis and are willing to do that. They also come with a very open-minded philosophy. So I'll give you another concrete example, which is there was a husband-wife couple who graduated from Yale University a couple of years ago. And he went to the School of Management. She went to the School of Forestry. And because Yale has what are called centers across the university to help this sort of facilitation and collaboration happen, they found that they had a unique shared interest in agriculture. And I guarantee you that neither of them came to the university knowing that their specific interest was going to be what's called OCARA, which is the production, or I guess you would even say the waste product in the production of soy. And so there is this sort of aftermarket product that essentially is sold to farmers. They feed to their cattle. It's food grade, so sort of, waste, quote unquote, but it's food grade. And they realized that they could dehydrate that. They could buy it for cheap because it was just being sold, as a waste product. They could buy it for cheap. They could dehydrate it and sell it as a flour alternative. And it was 4 times higher in fiber content. So had a really unique marketing aspect as well. So now bring back in that New Haven is a very approachable city. They were able to contract with some bakeries in New Haven to use the products in some of their goods. So it taught them lessons in terms of distribution and retail and on and on. Possible in New Haven, in a city that has such dramatic connections with Yale University already. And so like I said, again, I guarantee you that neither of them came to this university thinking that they were going to, be dehydrating soy after market waste product. But a major pivot for both of them. They found each other through what's called the Center for Business Environment at Yale, because Yale has these centers in order to help combine people. So there are things that Yale does in order to, from a facilities perspective, help those connections to happen. I think it's important, though, that students also come with that broad-minded thinking. They come with sort of a risk mindset. They come with an open minds, frankly. And, again, the university makes it possible through things like centers, through things like co-teaching classes, through, selecting students who are mission-driven. And so there are lots of things that happen that are magical, but also there's a self-selection that we benefit from on our side. I'll tell you that, the Career Development Office has a really unique challenge among MBA programs. So I believe last year's graduating class went to 109 unique employers. That's unprecedented. For a class that was about 325 students, to go to 109 employers gives you a sense of the kind of job that the Career Development Office has to manage in terms of making sure existing employers, whether it be, traditional, finance consulting brand names, anywhere through, traditional tech firms that, have hired SOM grads before. Remember, that we're here and, are up to date on what's new, but also it tells you that they're constantly reaching out to new employers who are hiring just one SOM graduate in any given year. And it gives you a sense, too, of how competitively those firms are actively recruiting from here, that they're willing to put in the time to recruit one single SOM graduate. Tells you how much they value this place. I think there were maybe about 5 or 6 companies that hired more than 5 SOM graduates, which also gives you a sense for how mission-driven individuals are. So really impressive on so many levels. Career Development Office does a fantastic job. I have tremendous respect for them. The collaborative nature of the students who come, whether it's in a formal capacity working in a student club, or an informal capacity just being a colleague who helps their peer prepare for the same job interview that they're also going to themselves, is really unparalleled at programs. But this place really pulls together, from a facilities perspective to help you get that internship, help you build your network in ways that, are going to make you the next leader for business and society.
Wow, I think that'll be all the candidates listening out. So you spoke, the collaboration at Yale. So my next question is actually about the class profile. Can you share with us specific statistics with regards to whom you are looking for your incoming class? Is GPA the most important? GMAT, GRE scores, years of work experience. What's it like for women, international students, especially from India?
Absolutely. So we published a number of stats with the intention of helping you as a candidate to really understand where you fit in terms of the level of competitiveness, if you will. By no stretch of the imagination is that intended to be a message to say, hit these criteria or don't apply, or if you hit these criteria, this is what we're looking for. But I can definitely share with you the profile of what our average student looks like, simply so you have a sense of, will my candidacy be competitive? GPA we report in a US 4.0 scale, and the median GPA is a 3.65. If you have come from a school that is not on a 4.0 scale, don't feel you need to convert it. In fact, we see applications from around the world. Readers are extremely professional in understanding the context of the school that you're in and what that scale is. So whether it's, first class through, second class, whether it's on a 12-point scale, whatever your scale is, we've probably seen it before, so don't feel you need to convert it for us. But I hope that, at least that, GPA sense gives you a relative benchmark, as you maybe make a mental calculation of, where would you fall in that. We do find that GPA matters some. What matters a lot, is the context of that. The coursework you've taken, the degree to which you've challenged yourself, how you have moved in terms of trajectory over your academic career. Did you culminate with some sort of thesis project? Have you done another master's degree or PhD? But we're really digging into your academic background to understand it on more than just the surface level than a GPA. So do know that, we are, we're really digging into that. And again, if you're thinking I'm a non-traditional student, I've come from a background of contemporary dance or psychology or, something else social sciences related, know that you're actually the more typical student. And we see a lot of that. We see a lot of folks who have come from economics or business as well, but just to say that there's a real diversity there. In terms of standardized test scores, we've historically reported the median GMAT scores, and in a couple ways. One is our median GMAT score is a 730, but we also report the 80th percentile range because we really are trying to send the signal, if you've got a 720, if you've got a 690, if you've got a 770, whatever you are in a certain bandwidth, know that we admit very heavily from, 80% of our class comes from the band of 690 to 760. And so when you're thinking about the competitiveness of your application, really that's probably a good benchmark, to know that you're somewhere within that range. If you're not within that range, it's not the end of your application. I'd definitely say that we have a holistic admissions process. Again, on the GPA side, it doesn't come down just to GPA, or on the standardized test score, it doesn't come just down to the score. We try to take the stress out as much as possible. And so we say, submit to us your two highest scores. And although we don't super score, we do really want to try to understand the context of what your scoring history has been. We're not in the business of promoting taking the test multiple times, but we don't punish you for that. If you don't have the score that you want, take the test again. Our hope is that you can maybe take some time and space to really prepare for that. There are any number of great programs out there to help you come up to speed quantitatively and verbally and improve your writing. Many don't even cost anything. So don't feel that you need to pay a tuition in order to bring yourself up to speed or to take it for a grade even. Do what makes sense for you, and just know that, again, we're looking at that fairly holistically. On the GRE side, we've historically not reported what our median scores are simply because we didn't have a high enough volume. We're now at about the place where about 15% of our scores are GRE scores, and so if it's not up on the website, it probably will be going up pretty soon, but the median score is about a 165 quantitatively and verbally, both individually. So if that helps give you a sense of where your competitiveness will lie as well, hope that helps. We're about 43% women, about 45% non-US passport holder. It's increasingly complex to report who's an international student, if you will, just to use that term. And so we're always looking for ways to quantify or qualify that. And so for us, a lot of folks ask, what percentage international are you? So I just want to be clear on, for us, it's the number of students who have a passport other than the US. It gets increasingly complex. Like I said, I can think of a student who graduated a couple of years ago who he was Indian in terms of background, but when he was a child, his family moved to Australia, and so he considered himself Australian, all of his life. Very young, he moved there, so he really was Australian. And then he came to the U.S. for college and ended up getting a U.S. passport as well. So he really considered himself, Australian, like I said, but he probably was, like the rest of us, which is, there was no one bucket that he fell into that really explained what his background was. So for us, he was an international student in the sense that he held a passport other than the U.S. But it's hard to scratch that surface of what that means. So that hopefully gives you some sense of basic profile. I would say my experience from traveling in India is the one that many candidates in India get hung up on is the number of years of work experience. And so the average number of years work experience is 5 years. It is by no means an end-all be-all to your application. If you are 1 year out of college, if you are in college currently and looking to apply directly to an MBA program, we have a great program called Silver Scholars for you. But if you have less than 5 years of work experience, don't feel you need to combine pieces and say, well, the summer between, this year and this year, at university, come together to make, 2 years. And then, I worked at, my father's or mother's, store, and that accounts for a certain number of other years. For us, it's full-time years of work experience is all that we ask you to report on the application. And I would say, we're interested in those other things you've done. You'll probably reflect those in your resume. Those have certainly added to your personal and professional background. But if you don't hit the 5 years, don't worry about it. We're much more interested in what you're hoping to get out of this experience, what preparation you've done to show us either in some of those professional experiences or through your thought process or your networking process. How thoughtful you've been in why this is the right program for you, why SOM, why now. So that's going to be much more important to us. So again, don't get hung up on 5 years of work experience, but just know that in terms of the life experiences of your classmates, if you were to come here, that's about where they've been. They've been about 5 years out of university with full-time work experience.
Drawing from that, I'm actually going to ask you about fit. Being able to pick the right program is crucial, right? You just said it right now. Let us know why you want to join Yale SOM. So at ReachIvy, we meet a lot of students who face this conundrum, so to speak. Who should be applying to this program? What is your student background like? What are the traits that you look for? How important is community or leadership experiences, in your consideration?
Yeah, and I'll definitely echo your sentiment, which is, that's one of the things that students are worried about the most is, am I going to be a fit for the university? And, it's a challenging word to really dig into. I think it's, probably accurate in terms of how students are thinking about the process. A lot of admissions offices, excuse me, will talk about authenticity. And I think that's important to echo as a point because for a lot of candidates, they think it's false advertising or, disingenuous advice. The schools most certainly must be looking for someone with a heavy quantitative background who has, worked in investment banking and wants to go back to investment banking, but the sense is that, the schools must be looking for this very traditional candidate. I definitely don't encourage you, or try to use a positive, I definitely encourage you to look beyond that. We're looking for folks who are a good fit, quote unquote, for our community. In large part because, like I said, 70% of candidates will make a pivot. So I think we would be in a really difficult spot if we said, all right, let's take, X percentage of our students for finance, that's our finance core, and let's take a certain percentage for consulting. And if we tried to overly engineer that, we would end up with a very different class on the recruiting ends than we expected because so many students are making a pivot. So we don't overthink that actually in the admissions office. We are really looking for your authenticity to a certain degree. If you say you're interested in social impact, what have you done about that? Who have you volunteered with? Are there some side projects that you're working on? Have you started to build a network? So all of the things that you're hoping to do when you get to business school, I think in some degree you could start to show now. That to us, there's an authenticity, but it's also predictive of students who will be successful as the ones who are willing to take that kind of initiative at this moment. So tell us what you're interested in. We certainly are hoping to piece it together. We'll ask you several times through the application, why you want an MBA, why now, why from Yale. Those are all questions that you would be prepared for as a candidate. We're not trying to stump you. We tell you exactly what we're looking for. Some of the things that we advertise on the website are very genuine on our end. We're looking for folks who have leadership potential. We're looking for folks who are broad-minded thinkers. We're looking for folks, particularly with the increasing rise of entrepreneurship interest, students who have a healthy risk calculation when it comes to taking those chances. So some of the things that we're looking for are exactly what we advertise for, and then we're trying to dig into your profile to understand where is that demonstrated. Through in your application in lots of places, comes through certainly in your essay, in your recommendations, comes through in your interview and in your video questions. And so, again, we're not trying to stump you in those questions. It's, why do you want an MBA? Why do you want it now? Why from Yale? We'll certainly dig into your professional experience to understand, some of the challenges that you've taken on there, how you have grown your career, the different responsibilities that have been assigned to you. We definitely want to understand all that in the context of, is this the right community for you?
Great. I think that's very helpful. So you mentioned why now, why MBA, why Yale, your application, right? So moving on to the application, could you talk us through this year's application?
Definitely. So I think of the application having maybe 3 sections. So we have an academic section. We're looking at your transcripts, and then we're looking at your standardized test scores, and that gives us some sense of, are we setting you up for success academically? We'd like for your transcript from every institution you've attended since the time you started university. So if you transferred schools, if you started a master's, if you finished a PhD, if you have a study abroad experience, any of those, we'd like all of those from the time you started. I mentioned that we're definitely interested in more than your GPA. We're looking at how you've challenged yourself over time. We're looking at what your trajectory has been. We're looking at the rigor of your study. But we're looking at many aspects to understand academically, who are you? How have you really highlighted yourself? And then from a test perspective, we'd like for your 2 highest scores, GMAT and or GRE, to give us a rounder sense as well. From a professional experience, we're looking for a 1-page resume ideally, and 2 professional letters of recommendation. So we recommend a 1-page resume. If you go past 1 page, that is allowed. We don't stop you from doing that. Just know that our advice is 1 page, and we've tried to help facilitate that as well. So in the sense that we really recognize that there are different levels of access provided to folks, whether it's in this case from different industries. Some people are better at reflecting what their impacts have been in the work environment. And we don't want you to be disadvantaged because you've had a particularly, or maybe you haven't had a particularly good mentor who said, hey, you should really restructure your resume this way. So we actually make our resume template available in the application. So feel free to use our resume template. It's the one that our career development office uses when they work with current students. Don't feel that you have to use it though. If you like your resume template, we are not going to read into this and say, oh, that was a poor choice not to use our template. It's simply provided there to provide access if that would be helpful to you. So we do hope that will be helpful to some students. Do try to quantify the extent to which you can, what your impacts have been. Some functions don't have nice quantitative impacts. That's also fine. And I would just highlight what your impacts have been. I think the impulse is often to write your job description on the resume, and that really won't give us a true sense of who have you been, how you've challenged yourself at work. That'll certainly tell us what you do, but we really want to understand how successful you've been there. So think about what your impacts have been. On the recommendation side, we do ask for it to be 2 professional letters. And one piece of advice that I would give to applicants is to take your time going into this. And so if you have the luxury of applying in a future year, you have time to develop your recommenders. Schedule some time with them for coffee or for lunch, and talk with them about why you're considering applying to an MBA program. Tell them specifically about the schools that you're interested in and what's unique about those schools. And then maybe just kind of sit back and ask for their advice. Do they think that an MBA makes sense? Do they think this sounds like something that would help you get to that next step of what you're saying your post-MBA goals are? But really, see it as an opportunity to get advice from someone who you trust and respect. Obviously, if you've asked for a recommendation for someone, or if you plan to ask for a recommendation, it's probably someone who professionally you really look up to. So at the very least, it's an opportunity to get some advice. But what you're going to find is that those folks are going to tell you in pretty direct terms whether they can offer you a positive reference, and you can certainly remind them of what your accomplishments have been, and you'll hear back from them, how they perceive that situation. And so, like I said, take some time to develop your recommenders. I would encourage you not to simply drop it on their lap and say, this is due in 2 weeks. You're probably not going to get the letter that you want, and you're also not going to get that advice piece. But on a professional level, we do ask for 2 letters of recommendation. If it can be a supervisor role is ideal. It's someone who has known you on a daily basis. Current supervisor is even better than a former supervisor. We recognize there are lots of situations in which that's not possible. So if you haven't told your current supervisor you're looking, you can't ask that person for whatever reason, former supervisor is usually a great second option. If you work for yourself, if you work for a family company, usually it's not ideal to ask your parents or your uncle for a letter of reference. In those situations, usually a client is the next best letter. But we allow you a tremendous degree of latitude. You could ask a colleague if you want. But usually someone who has supervised you on a daily basis, or you've reported to, in the case of a client, let's say, is going to be the best positioned person to write you a letter of reference. If you're a current undergraduate student and applying for the Silver Scholars Program, we will accept 1 letter from a academic professor. That's fine. But our experience is that second letter, you've had some professional experience. It may be that you did a research assistant job, maybe that you did an internship between your last year and this year. So you've had some professional experience, and we'll certainly look at your application in that way as well. You just haven't had full-time professional experience, and that's okay. But just know that we do expect one of those to be professional as well. And then the third part of our application is sort of everything else, if you will. It's the video questions, it's the essay, and there's a biographical section as well. But the application fee is maybe the third piece that I'd highlight within that as well. We've tried to be as accessible again as possible across the world, and recognize that not every industry and not every geography pays on a US-based finance industry scale. And so we base it on your salary, what you're doing, and provide a really flexible application fee, again, to try to be as accessible as possible to candidates around the world. And then backing up on the video questions, my experience is that's probably about the second most anxiety-inducing aspect of our application, maybe right behind the GMAT or the GRE. So let me just blanketly say, without knowing who you are, you're probably going to do great. My experience is somewhere just under 100% of candidates think they did terrible on the video questions. They're thinking about any number of things they could have done better, but they did great. So just have that as sort of in your back pocket.
Okay. That's actually really, really helpful. So Jared, we're actually running short on time. I'm going to ask you a last couple of questions, then we're going to wrap up the call. Could you tell us a little bit about financial aid and any last piece of advice, in terms of career or just in general for students that would help them, in their application to Yale SOM?
Sure, and sorry if I've gone on too long. I'll try to be pretty brief with the last ones. So from financial aid perspective, we offer merit-based scholarships only. There's nothing additional you need to do to qualify for that. If you are awarded a scholarship, we'll give you that decision at the same time as we give you your admissions decision. Just know that our context is we give scholarships to only about a third of our students, and that they tend to be a lot smaller than peer institutions. We're, I would say, comfortable with that. We wish we had more money, but the reason for that is we put the bulk of our resources into loan forgiveness. So for students who are interested in pursuing nonprofit or social sector or government sector, they stand a very good chance of qualifying for the loan forgiveness program, which can be up to $101,000 in loan forgiveness. So essentially see that as a $101,000 scholarship that every student is eligible for. And we're seeing an increasing number of students who are taking advantage of that as well. So that's a huge deal. There's no school that has anything even close to that kind of offer. And so that's where we put the bulk of our resources so that you're not feeling compelled to pursue a more traditional industry, a more traditional salary, if that's not what you want to do coming out of this place. Again, there's nothing additional you need to do to qualify for that. Maybe the last thing I would say, on the second part of your question is, sort of the general, what other advice? I think I maybe touched on this a little bit, but in general, I would say take advantage of the journey, is one of my best advices in admissions. So I talked about how from a recommendations perspective, don't simply see it as getting the recommendation from someone, see it as getting advice from someone, and the recommendation is kind of a bonus, if you will. But take the time to reflect, self-reflect on what your career has been as you're writing the essay, as you're putting together the application. Take the time to listen to the advice from your recommenders. Take the time to really understand if a school is the right community for you, but don't think of it simply as the end result. If you focus on, did I get in or did I not get in, you will miss a huge journey in terms of understanding who you are, what your professional aspirations are, what gaps you need to fill in between. But it's an amazing self-reflective opportunity to understand for yourself what your journey should be and the potential that you have.
Wow, that's actually very, very good advice. So this was a fantastic talk. You've really given us an in-depth understanding of Yale, the program, the city, the classroom, everything. And it was personally really, really great talking to you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time out to share all this knowledge and understanding of Yale with us. To everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. For the guys who were part of the webinar today. If you have any other questions or queries, please feel free to reach out to help@reachivy.com or log on to www.reachivy.com and submit a query. Thank you. Thank you, Jared. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me.